Hi, and welcome to R&R Living Life. In this episode, Rick and I explore Alice Springs as we visit Arunti Telegraph Reserve, the Alice Springs Desert Park, pay our respects at Albert Namatjira and Reverend John Flynn's graves, and explore Simpsons Gap. We begin this episode as we leave Gidget at the caravan park on the outskirts of Alice Springs and make our way to the Arunti Telegraph Reserve, or the Alice Springs Telegraph Station, located about 4 kilometres north of Alice Springs, and is one of the original sites of European settlement in the township of Stuart, established in 1872, later renamed Alice Springs. However, for thousands of years the Arunti people had met for ceremonies and to exchange goods in this very spot. Construction of the telegraph station began adjacent to the waterhole in November 1871 under the supervision of Gilbert McMinn. A number of structures were eventually built, including a harness room, buggy shed, police station, blacksmith shop, telegraph office, kitchen building, and station master's residence. Supplies arrived from Adelaide just once per year, so self-sufficiency was critical. Stockyards and a large garden area were also developed. While the waterhole supplied the settlement with water, a well was later sunk to maintain supply during drought periods. The Alice Springs Telegraph Station was one of 12 electrical telegraph stations along the Overland Telegraph Line, sending messages 3,200 kilometres between Darwin and Adelaide. After completion, the telegraph station operated for 60 years, closing in 1932, when the telegraph operations were relocated to the new township of Stuart, reflecting the growth and development of the region. Between 1932 and 1960, the site operated as the Bungalow, a residential institution for mixed-race Aboriginal children, playing a significant role in the history of Indigenous communities in the area. From as early as 1914, part Aboriginal children were removed from town camps around Stuart and housed in the Bungalow, which was often overcrowded and with disgraceful conditions. At the time, the government's aim was to protect primarily children of mixed race and those who they thought were suffering, but within a decade began removing children from their families to be civilised, which meant being trained as servants. Certainly not a beneficial or acceptable strategy for the communities in the area. In July 1862, explorer John McDowell Stuart led his third and final expedition through the centre of Australia. Travelling to the north coast, he was navigating and mapping the country for European settlement. His study of how the Aboriginal people lived allowed him to survive where the likes of Leichhardt and Burke and Wills had perished. Also, because he was able to travel much lighter and faster, foraging for food and digging for water rather than trying to drag tons of supplies through the desert. His expedition led to the South Australian government allocating funds for the construction of an overland telegraph line, closely following the route taken by Stuart. The overland telegraph line was completed in 1872, allowing fast communication between Australia and the rest of the world. Charles Todd was appointed as head of the project and was given 2 years to construct the line, with the construction of the line beginning in early 1871, involving around 500 men split into 3 sections, and would be comprised of more than 30,000 wrought-iron poles, insulators, batteries, wire and other equipment ordered from England, with the poles placed 80 metres apart and with repeater stations having year-round water availability and separated by no more than 250 kilometres. In December of that year, 1871, the first Morse code signals were sent along the completed southern section of the line. However, the northern team encountered a violent monsoon that washed away more than 1,000 telegraph poles and cut them off from resupplies, until Todd was able to get a barge up the flooded Roper River to rescue them. By the time the undersea cable from Java was connected on the 19th of November 1871, there were still problems facing the completion of the northern section. In the interim, the line was largely in use, with horse or camels carrying messages across the uncompleted section. Messages sent by Todd along the incompleted line in May 1872 took 9 days to reach Adelaide. Running more than 7 months behind schedule, the Java to Darwin submarine telegraph cable was finally joined on the 22nd of August 1872, with the joining of the north and central sections of the line at Frew Ponds near Dunmara, 300 kilometres south of Katherine. The overland telegraph line not only bridged Australia's population centres and geographical isolation, but also integrated the continent into the broader telegraph network of the British Empire. Before its construction, messages to England took months via sea voyages, but with the telegraph, communication through Alice Springs could reach London in as little as 5 hours, an astonishing engineering feat in the 19th century, and possibly the most significant milestone in the history of telegraph in Australia. We visited John Flynn's grave historical reserve just out of Alice Springs. In 1912, John Flynn was sent by the Presbyterian Church to investigate the needs of bushmen and women living in the Northern Territory, where he found a lack of services that city people took for granted, with communication slow and difficult illness and injury often proving fatal. His report led to the establishment of the Australian Inland Mission. With tremendous energy and enthusiasm, Flynn set about implementing his dream of a mantle of safety that would bring medical, social and religious services to isolated outback communities. To overcome loneliness and distance, Flynn's idea of a cheap, hardy and easy-to-operate wireless transmitting set in every outback home or bush camp to connect people with all the services they required. In 1928, Alfred Traeger perfected a pedal-powered radio transceiver that could send and receive messages over 500 kilometres, breaking the outback's great silence. Along with aviation, medicine and the radio working together effectively, the world's first air ambulance medical service began as the Flying Doctor Service, with the first flight in 1928 from Cloncurry. Its success promoted the establishment of aerial medical services in other regions. John Flynn died in 1951, and his ashes were placed here at Mount Gillen, under a large boulder from the Devil's Marbles. Unfortunately, it belonged to a sacred site and was later replaced with one acceptable to the Aboriginal people, both the original Rock's home and the Yurunti people on whose land the grave lies. From John Flynn's memorial, we made our way to the Alice Springs Desert Park, located at the base of Mount Gillen in the spectacular West MacDonnell Ranges, just 10 minutes from Alice Springs, where the desert park is closely connected to the local Arunti people. Opened in 1997, the park covers 1,300 hectares, with the core area of 54 hectares of park, with walk-through, well-designed aviaries that allowed us to see the many bird species that live in each habitat. Not only the aviaries, but the information boards and signage throughout the 3 distinct desert habitats, the desert rivers, the sand country and the woodlands, and each of the sections with smaller enclosures, including the Nocturnal House, Kangaroo Enclosure, Nature Theatre, Desert Rivers Discovery Zone and Dingo Territory. Rick and I learnt more about how the Indigenous stories and the history of the Arunti people are connected to the environment in not only their spiritual way, but also how they managed and lived within such a harsh environment. We strolled along the mulga walk with striking mulga trees, witchetty bushes and native grasses, just to name a few, as well as some of the rocks found in the area, all with signage explaining their relevance and home to a variety of desert animals. In the trees around some of the enclosures, birds had made their nests, having been attracted to the calls of those in the aviaries. We walked through numerous aviaries showcasing different bird species. Trying to get photographs of some of the tiny birds was near impossible, especially the wrens that didn't stay still in one place long enough. With the rangers in the background, it was invigorating and a thoroughly enjoyable walk through each habitat, seeing not only the diversity of plants but some of the animals found there. We stepped inside the nocturnal house that spotlights the endangered animals including bilby, echidna, battongs, bandicoots, bushstone curlews and marla in their natural habitats, not to mention the reptiles and insects also found in the desert region. It was eerie walking around in the dimly lit reddish surrounding, but the displays were amazing. Trying to photograph a bilby was near impossible, as it moved so fast around its enclosure. Outside we stopped at the Nature Theatre, where we enjoyed the live raptor show. What an amazing experience, where we got up relatively close to a brown falcon, a boobook, a barn owl and a wedge-tailed eagle. What a spectacular encounter! Just above our heads sat a barn owl, and to see the wedge-tailed eagle up close was amazing, not to mention the other birds. The willy wagtail made his entertaining entrance, spreading gossip, though really was not part of the show. There was so much to see while visiting the park, and if you have at least half a day minimum, put it on your bucket list, as it is well worth the visit. It was an interesting and powerful exhibition of authentic Australian central desert environments that blended the plants, birds, animals and the people of this arid region into a fantastic place to visit, as well as being a conservation facility. Our visit to the park has been one of the highlights of our trip. From the desert park we made our way back into town. We visited the grave site of Albert Namatjira, Western Oronti man born in Hermannsburg, to pay our respects to such an amazing artist. He began painting in European style using watercolour at the age of 33, depicting ghost gums with their luminous white trunks, palm-filled gorges and red mountain ranges turning purple at dusk, having all the hallmarks of the Hermannsburg and Finke River area. The colours, perspective and details was astonishing, and I can vividly remember his artwork in classrooms as a young girl. His Western-style landscapes, different from traditional Aboriginal art, made him famous, leading to Albert and his wife becoming the first Aborigines to be granted Australian citizenship in 1957. It was a significant achievement, though his ethnic origins hindered him his freedom as other citizens of Australia at the time, because being Aboriginal he had few rights, including not being able to lease land or build his own home. Though this great painter captured Australia's heart in artwork and was praised around the world, his life showed white Australians the injustice of racist laws and contributed to long overdue changes for his people. From Albert Namatjira's gravesite we drove to the top of Anzac Hill, a site of traditional Aboriginal and European historic significance, a strategic point in times of natural disaster and a war memorial. For the first 60 years of European settlement it was simply called the Hill, later known as Stout Hill and View Hill. It was named Anzac Hill in 1934 in memory of the soldiers that were killed during World War I. During World War II, a large military presence increased the population of Alice Springs dramatically. Below the hill, where there is now an oval, and to the east, was established a large camp for the soldiers of the Australian Army's Darwin Overland Maintenance Force. The unit was one of many which operated vehicular convoys carrying personnel and supplies to Darwin along the north-south road. The track later named the Sturt Highway throughout the war years. Anzac Hill is also a sacred site for the Corkwood Dreaming, a part of the explanation for the creation of the landscape for the Yarrunti people. From the top we could see over Alice Springs, the main river the Todd, and its tributary the Charles River, the West Macdonnell Ranges, and back towards the telegraph station, and could see why Alice Springs gets flooded on occasions, especially as it sits on the floodplains of both rivers, and water is funneled through Havitree Gap at the southern entrance to Alice. We spent time reading the memorial plaques around the top, along with information regarding the Yarrunti people. The following day we made our way to Simpsons Gap, about 20 minutes drive from Alice Springs, stopping in at the Visitor Information Centre, where we met with a very friendly and knowledgeable park ranger. The name Simpson Gap first appeared on a sketch map of the area made in 1871 by Gilbert McMinn, a member of the Overland Telegraph Survey Party, but who or what Simpson was is unknown, or why the spelling changed to include the letter P. Simpson Gap National Park was originally a pastoral lease used for fattening stock on their way to market. At the time of the Second World War, the station owner Jack Hughes made an argument that the station would run some dairy cattle and supply milk to the soldiers based in Alice Springs. During the war years, areas that had previously only been accessible by horse and camel now became accessible to the rugged army vehicles that had started arriving in Alice Springs, leading to the area becoming a popular destination. Rick and I took a short stroll along the path beside the Sandy Creek bed lined by ancient ghost gums that took us to the magnificent permanent waterhole between towering, awe-inspiring cliffs of Simpsons Gap, one of the most prominent gaps in the West Macdonnell Ranges. The gap has been carved out of the ranges by Roe Creek, and here the water flows through a small gap in the Macdonnell Ranges. On the rocky slopes we saw the very shy and well-camouflaged black-footed rock wallaby. It was a stunning sight, but very windy and cold, even with thick coats on. Even the rock walls appeared to be frosted. To the Yarrunti Aboriginal people, Simpsons Gap was the mythological home of a group of giant goanna ancestors, with several dreaming trails and stories crossing here at this important spiritual site. We will leave you for this episode as we leave Simpsons Gap and make our way to Stanley Chasm. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Give us a thumbs up if you did. Join us next time as we explore Stanley Chasm and then make our way along the Plenty Highway to the Queensland border, stopping in at Gemtree and Jervois before making camp at Tobermory. Take care and stay safe. Cheers for now. Rick and Rosemary. R&R, living life.